Hello, and a very warm welcome to our December edition of our Stories from the Strongrooms series, which brings you the narratives found within our treasure troves of collections here at the Hull History Centre. If this is your first time stopping by our channel, a very warm welcome indeed to you, and for those of you returning, it really is wonderful to have you back here with us. As always, please remember to click that little bell icon to make sure you're notified whenever a new video goes live. Today I have something very cosy and warm for you, a second instalment of the Christmas Diaries of George Thorp. It was 2 years ago this month that the first instalment was unwrapped, and if you haven't had the pleasure of seeing that video, then I recommend you check it out. I've popped a link in the description box below, and it gives you a bit more information on George's background. George's diaries don't only relate to this festive time of year, but span almost 30 years from 1911 to 1940. They originated as a record of the weather in Hull, but soon expanded to include details of national and international current events, as well as details of George's daily activities and the people he met along the way. But as we head into this merry season, these diaries give a heartwarming account of George's festive celebrations. And they'll be accompanied in this video by a visual feast of all things Christmas related, found within our strong rooms here at the History Centre. You'll remember from last time that George shares his home with his son Joseph and their housekeeper. Last time we left George on Christmas Day in 1924, celebrating the festivities with his family. We'll begin our tale today and return to visit George on Christmas Day 1925. So sit back, relax with a mug of steaming hot chocolate or drink of your choice in hand, and come with me as we journey through George Thorp's Christmases of yesteryear. Wintry landscape thawing in the sun, freezing in the shade except in Chantlands Avenue where all was wet and sloppy. Got up about 9:30 a.m. and exchanged presents. A most strange coincidence. I gave Joseph a £1/4 of tobacco and a book, and he gave me a £1/4 of tobacco and a book. Did you ever hear anything so surprising? He also gave to me beautiful gloves, to Mrs. Harrison a treasury note, and from Joseph to her an envelope of money. The contemplation of all these treasures made us late for church, but only by 5 minutes. Only a small congregation. Joseph estimated it at not more than 35, which is the smallest I can remember. But it was a beautiful and helpful little service. Returning home, we had to prepare for a visit to Bertie's. So we marched off in a delightful atmosphere over hard-beaten snow and arrived safely. Joseph carrying a large bag and I with my new fur-lined tan gloves, carrying a package which looked considerably heavier than it really was. We sat down to dinner, 11 of us, roast goose and appurtenances, concluding with the immemorial plum pudding, after which all but the caterers and waitresses adjourned to the front room. During the afternoon, a perfect spray of goodwill in the form of presents descended on everyone present. Joseph was the main source of this cascade of generosity, except one which was a most extraordinary event, being from an individual I had never seen before, and who had only a few minutes earlier been introduced to me. He is Muriel's young man, name Edwards. He apologised for taking the liberty and presented me with a pipe. The pipe was quite as extraordinary as the liberty. It's 1 foot 2 inches long, it divides into 5 parts, and is a very good one to smoke. Had a quiet afternoon, part of the company amusing themselves by washing up the dinner things, others playing on the piano, and the head of the household occupying the time by making up huge fires, emptying and replenishing the coal pan every quarter of an hour. Home to a cup of cocoa, and so ends, joyfully, the last Christmas Day in the last diary I intend to write. Christmas Day, 1926. I had finished my breakfast before Joseph came down, and when he did, I was overwhelmed by a multiplicity of costly gifts. The immemorial £1/4 of gold block, a Gruyere pipe, and last but by no means least, a splendid and informative book by our old friend and scientist, Professor Macready Price, entitled The Phantom of Organic Evolution. Then to morning service, where we had a devout and impressive Thanksgiving service, joined in a gathering of between 50 and 60 people. We returned home and had a sumptuous dinner. The plum pudding was a size smaller than we had been used to in that class of comestible, and we left very little of it. Besides what we gave her, Miss Railton had hosts of other presents from her relations and friends. After clearing away, she went out to tea at her brother-in-law's, Mr. Mander's, so Joseph and I had the afternoon, our tea, and the evening together, and had a delightful time examining and sampling our presents, playing over a game of chess, reading and chatting till Miss Railton came back. Generally a damp time with many showers. I have a disagreeable cold and my knee hurts, but I slept well. Christmas Day, 1927. Was roused after much knocking at 9:15. Came downstairs, washed, donned the tie and handkerchief that Fanny had given me, and had a frugal breakfast. When Joseph came down he overwhelmed me with more gifts. A pair of splendid, fair-lined, exact-fitting gloves to make up for those I carelessly roasted on Wrighton's stove, and a quarter-pound of gold block. Turned out into a grey morning with a strong north-east wind, and made my way to our place of worship. At the close of the service was greeted by Mr. Waddington and other friends. Walked home, Joseph leaving me to call in at Walter's Terrace to leave a prize book for a small boy who had won it by his essay. Joseph overtook me in Ella Street. Dinner, pork chops with onion gravy and other accessories. Miss Railton out to tea, Joseph to the cemetery with flowers. At night, a heavy gale from the north-east. Joseph to Newland Church, I to worship alone, but strangely moved by the sense of nearness to the Father of all mercies. After about an hour, just as I was commencing to read, there was a knock at the back door, and it was Mr. Maclaister bringing a small cranberry tart. He stayed with me until Joseph came in, and shortly after departed. Christmas Day, 1928. I piled two little parcels on Joseph's breakfast plate, one containing a quarter-pound of Bolton's smoking mixture, the other a nice pipe. Had my breakfast, and shortly afterwards he came down laden with parcels, and they were all for me. I was overcome. An amazing pair of slippers, brown and yellow pattern, wool and extra lined inside, leather soles, boot shape, and fastened with bronze buckles. Scott's Last Expedition, a sorrowful story, and a quarter-pound of gold block tobacco. No time to properly examine this, owing to being wishful to be at Newland for the morning service. Arrived in good time, fairly good congregation, simple, quietly devout service. Many greetings and expressions of goodwill at the close of the service, and then home to dinner. The dinner was a noble round of sirloin, mashed and baked potatoes, Brussels sprouts, all most admirably cooked and served, and to finish, the indispensable British plum pudding. Did not go out again, but sat, wrote, and read, dipping first into one book and then another, while Joseph arranged our numerous Christmas cards, all well chosen and attractive. Another present to me from Joseph is my portrait drawn by him. We had a very sumptuous tea, though any share of it was only a small one. A pleasant evening was the close to a very happy day. Christmas 1929. Usual interchange of presents of goodwill. I gave the stereotyped quarter-pound of Bolton mixture and pipe, and received in return a quarter-pound of gold block and a pipe, and a couple of warm nightgowns. I am to have one on tonight. A diary from Fanny came by post for me, and a letter for Joseph enclosing a handkerchief and a little book of beautiful poems. We received some more Christmas cards. I gave Mrs. Baker a 10-shilling note and a little book of postage stamps. Joseph gave her something, I know not what. I then set out for morning service, a creditable congregation, many from Lambert Street Primitive Methodists visiting us, a scanty choir, Miss Boys aided at the organ, and Reverend Holt preached an admirable discourse. Dinner as usual, no edification to be derived by dilating upon the menu. Suffice to say that we ate to repletion. In the afternoon, Harry and Madge called in, presented us with a nice necktie each, stayed a while, and then departed. Our Christmas Day rose still flies its banner. Christmas Day 1930. Had a beautiful night's repose, did not wake until after 10 a.m. Came downstairs, wished Mrs. Kemp all the good wishes that could be, presented her with a letter containing a 10-shilling note. Placed 2 boxes on Joseph's place at the breakfast table, one containing a pair of house slippers, and the other a quarter-pound of Bolton mixture. Breakfast was a turbulent meal interrupted by exclamations of surprise at the bale of parcels Joseph had brought down for me. At last I was at liberty to open them. 2 a quarter-pound boxes of the famous gold block, and from Miss Briggs a box of Irish linen cottons, one of them a dainty single one with points turned down, and wonder of wonders, a blackbird fountain pen, self-filling of the latest design and finish. Then Joseph gave a handsome box of ladies' handkerchiefs to Mrs. Kemp, with which she was well pleased. The multiplicity of presents received by Joseph from outside friends cannot be described. To chapel Mr. Holt preached. A delightful, restful day for me. Joseph, in his old overcoat and old cap and heavy winter books, went out to Chantlands Avenue through the falling snow to post some letters, and then walked from the pillar box through Chantlands Avenue to the Cottingham Road, and back home via Newland Avenue, looking like Father Christmas when he came in. Dinner, a sumptuous spread. Roast chicken, fried sausages, mashed potatoes, bread stuffing, white sauce, and no end of other accessories, which I cannot remember. The chicken was of the tenderest description and perfectly cooked, and when the plum pudding appeared, it rivalled in taste and appearance any of its predecessors. He rose satisfied, if not replete. Christmas Day 1931. Pleasant, mild day, southwest wind, much sunshine in the afternoon, and an impressive sunset. Coming down this morning, I questioned Mrs. Kemp concerning last night. She was evasive and said she would explain after the holidays, so I dropped the subject. Laid out my presents for Joseph, a book, quarter-pound of Bolton mixture, and a pipe. When he came down he was burdened. Most of the packages he was carrying were for me. The Light for the Faith by Rayner and Jansen, Let Us Go to Poplar by Reverend Lax, a quarter-pound of Golden Block, and a splendid tobacco pouch with my initials in gilt letters. He had a writing case and stationery for Mrs. Kemp. Mutual congratulations and good wishes. Breakfast, a rest, viewing all our gifts, and then to the Christmas morning service. Reverend John Talbot was very happy in his discourse to the children. Back home where Mrs. Kemp was preparing the dinner. A messenger, Uncle Ned, came with a car to fetch Mrs. Kemp to the wedding of Miss Morton to young Johnson. Was back by the same means in a little over half an hour. Dinner was served, a sumptuous repast for 3 people. A plump roasted chicken with a fringe of sausages, with the usual bread, stuffing, etc., etc., and then the inevitable plum pudding, rich and super excellent. A lazy afternoon, accompanied, as far as I was concerned, by the commencement of a severe cold, coupled with a hard tickling cough. Then followed tea, a meal I could well have dispensed with. While Mrs. Kemp was washing up, the motor car returned to take her to the reception after the wedding at Cottingham. Evening marred by the unpleasantness of my running cold, sampling various tobaccos and new pipes, reading, crosswords, supper, prayer, and to bed. Christmas Day, 1932. Morning full of sunshine, nevertheless much moisture in the atmosphere. Real fog, very extensive from Newland to Ella Street. For me, up early. This is a day of gifts. To Mrs. Kemp by me the picture and a letter of goodwill. By Joseph the frame that made it complete and a box of lavender soap. Joseph to me a quarter-pound tin of gold block, half a dozen fine linen handkerchiefs, 6 collars, and a low pipe. Miss Briggs to me a quarter-pound of gold block. I am set up for tobacco for months, and what I save thereby will go to the missionary box. Reached Newland promptly to the time the choir took their seats. Very small congregation, but for the orphans. Scanty, why I cannot say. Helped to clear the books, greeted many friends, walked home. Dinner was served later than usual, and a very handsome and well-cooked meal it was. Roast chicken with all accessories and plum pudding. We all rested in the afternoon, Joseph deferring his usual visit until tomorrow. Tea, but this, in a measure, was only a formula, so replete were we with the magnificent banquet Mrs. Kemp had provided as a midday meal. After Joseph and Mrs. Kemp to the several appointments, and when the time arrived to worship in universal harmony with all throughout the world who at this time approached the throne of grace. Christmas 1933. Rose much refreshed, breakfast and a distribution of presents to an amazing and bewildering amount. I scarcely can call to mind the variety and the number of them. The day swiftly passed and dinner arrived, of such an elaborate and varied foods that it ought to be spelt with a capital D. Roast chicken and sausages, mashed potatoes and Brussels sprouts. There were many delicate accessories to this stupendous feast, of which I know not the names, but in Mrs. Kemp's opinion they were absolutely necessary. Then the plum pudding. Mrs. Kemp and Joseph cleared away, and I commenced writing events of the day, when there was a knock at the front door. Joseph went and brought in Madge and Fanny. We were very pleased to see them, and they brought a real bagful of news. Kenneth was married last Saturday at St. Mary and St. Peter's Church, Dairycoats. Josephine has been engaged temporarily at Marks and Spencer's in Whitefrigate. She finishes next Saturday, but is to call on the manager on the following Tuesday. She also is engaged to, Harry says, a very nice, steady young man. We did not have our evening meal until 6:30 p.m., and then it seemed rather superfluous, but we did our best. Altogether, it's been a very happy day, though I have not been very well, choked up by cold, short of breath, and altogether out of sorts. Mrs. Kemp has caught cold, and Joseph is the mainstay of our home. Supper and reading out of my beautiful new Bible, prayer, and I hope, sleep. Christmas Day, 1934. Gloomy day outside, gas on from early morning to bedtime, but comfort and peace within. Down in good time, though disturbed during the night by coughing. Handed my tokens of goodwill to Joseph and intimated there was more to follow, but owing to circumstances over which I had no control, it had not arrived yet. At present, a £1/4 of Bolton mixture and a City Deluxe pipe. Then to Mrs. Kemp, a letter and enclosure. Breakfast, and then I am overwhelmed by a multiplicity of gifts from Joseph. Some fine linen collars, a £1/4 gold block, a pipe, a most fascinating book entitled The Basis of Christian Faith by Hamilton. Also another £1/4 of gold block from Miss Briggs. What with Westerby's present of a £1/4 of medium capstan navy cut, we have, with a box of cigars sent by Sumpton and Walker, a tremendous stock of tobacco laid up that will last for months. I am wondering what Mr. and Mrs. Johnson of the Bonbon will think when I no longer for some time pay my usual weekly visit. However, each week, if I like, I shall put into the missionary and the infirmary boxes the amount I usually spend in tobacco, which I humbly pray the Lord is my life and God of my salvation will accept. Rather pressed for time, Joseph rushed off to take part in the hour's worship at Newland morning reading. No newspaper, which some of us miss. Joseph returns and reports a very good congregation, and that after the service was over he walked up the Cottingham Road as far as Fairfax Avenue, through there to Bricknell Avenue, and so by way of Chantellans Avenue home. A good long stretch in a short time. A sit and a talk, and then came dinner in the cooking and serving up of which Mrs. Kemp had surpassed herself. First our duck, which looked like a small goose, with every accessory that the mind of the culinary artist could devise. Mrs. Kemp said it was too rich, I that it was delicious, and Joseph said nothing, but carved excellently, and had 2 helpings. Then the indispensable and immemorial pudding, and all were replete, if not exhausted. Sitting, reading, and talking, the afternoon passed swiftly, and it was long after 6 o'clock before anyone thought of or wished for the meal called tea. The force of habit prevailed, so it was duly introduced. Many good things on the table, but few partaken of, lack of any real appetite in the members of the family distinctly visible. A quiet time when we settled down again, when someone proposed a game of dominoes, which was agreed to. We played to about 9:30, when Mrs. Kemp was the victor, hailed with acclamation, and her prize, the handsomely decorated Christmas cake she had made herself. Christmas Day, 1935. A new moon. Had a much better repose than I had dared to hope for. Down to breakfast, and then was overwhelmed without the least exaggeration by presents of gifts from my dear boy, who evidently is of the opinion that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Two wonderful nightgowns, gorgeously striped in a way like a sultan's robes, and warm and thick like wool overcoats. A £1/4 tin of gold block, and as a climax, a very superior BBB briar pipe. I could only feebly respond by an attaché case of best cowhide leather and a £1/4 of Bolton mixture. He also gave our Dean Mrs. Kemp presents, she being as pleased and excited at my numerous gifts as I was myself. Mine to her was a treasury note, with a letter expressing, as best I could, hope and comfort for her in her present distress over the trouble of her son Norman. Yesterday, Lily Simpson brought as a token of goodwill 3 of her own ornate mince pies. She and her friend Miss Brown are moving from Ella Street to 11 Park Avenue, a large house converted into sets of modern flats, of which they have taken one, and move into it on Monday next. Next in order, not of merit but of time, the Christmas dinner, one of Mrs. Kemp's triumphs at this time of year. Roast duck with every imaginable accessory possible, mashed potato, onion stuffing, apple sauce, and Brussels sprouts, and rich brown gravy, the cooking superb, followed by the Christmas pudding. We adjourned to Mrs. Kemp's room, where there was a good fire, and sat comfortably and listened to our King's broadcast speech to the Empire. Then we rose and sang God Save the King, and continued standing while we heard Scotland, North Ireland, Wales, Canada, New Zealand, and north of England and London. It was wonderful, but Little Wales was best of all. Then about an hour and a half's feast of music from the Hastings Municipal Band, interspersed by about 6 solos by a splendid tenor. Among his songs were Sally in Our Alley and Come into the Garden, Maud. When it was all over, I was quite giddy with excitement and pleasure. Supper, reading, prayer, and to rest. And this is where our story ends. But it's certainly not the end of George's diaries. So if you're interested in finding out more, check out the description box below where I've included details of the collection and how you can see the diaries in person for yourself. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for all of your support here on our History Centre channel. It is very much appreciated. And on behalf of all the staff here at the History Centre, I'd like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you for watching. Bye.